that I want to get into is whether an atheist can have an absolute morality. But I want to start by taking a step back for a kind of introduction, which I think will make the picture more complete and also sort of anticipate objections that might occur down the line. About 10 years ago, I was in Los Angeles, and I was supposed to speak at UCLA to a group of Jewish students. And on the way over, the local person said to me, by the way, just to let you know, none of these students believe in truth. Oh, I said, really? They don't believe in truth? No, that's been lost in the dust of history. So I decided maybe I'll give them an introduction about truth. Maybe a quarter of an hour. So here's the idea. There's a person, we'll call him the relativist, who says there's no such thing as a universal, objective, valid, correct truth. Different people have different perspectives, different ideas, different beliefs, different attitudes, different commitments, and that's all there is. So I'd like to interview this fellow and ask him a few questions. And on the basis of the interview, we'll decide what kind of conclusion we should have about this proposition. Here's my first question. Mr. Relativist, I have two people, Peter and Paul. Peter comes from a society that believes that the earth is round. And he therefore believes, he actually believes, that if you start at the equator and go due west, eventually you'll come right round to the place where you started. Paul comes from a society and a culture and a belief system and a value system that the earth is flat. And he believes that if you start at the equator and go due west, eventually you fall off the edge. Now, I'm taking a trip with Peter and Paul. I'm going to start at the equator and go due west. So Paul doesn't want to come along, but I have a gun. So I'm taking both of them along. I want to ask you, Mr. Relativist, what's going to happen on my trip? Well, let's see. Should he say, well, Peter, who belongs to a society, a culture, a belief system, and stuff and so on, that it's round, will indeed go right round and come back to where he started. And Paul, who comes from society and belief system and culture that is flat, he will fall off the edge. That's what will happen. Peter will go around and he'll fall off the edge, and Paul will fall off the edge. Is that what's going to happen? I think if he says that, game over. But if he says both of them are going to go right round, I will ask him, why did you vote in favor of Peter's belief system against Paul's belief system? What difference did you find in them to predict on the basis of this one rather than that one? If there's nothing but different people and different cultures and different belief systems and different commitments, that's all there is, and there's no way to grade them and to say that one is somehow better than the other, why choose one over the other to make a prediction? I don't think that the relativist can answer that question. That's question number one. Number two, sometimes people change their minds. Not everybody. I got a letter from a father who's having trouble with his 20-year-old, and one of the 20-year-old's principle was, never change your mind. Because if you change your mind, you're unreliable. Try that one on for size. But most people change their minds from time to time. I hope you don't believe now what you believed when you were 6. Now, people change their minds for different reasons. Sometimes for social reasons, to fit in with the crowd. But sometimes they believe something, they have experiences, and they think, uh-oh, since that happened, maybe my belief isn't appropriate. I got a can of dog food, and it says pure dog food, and then I fed some to my dog, and my dog dropped dead. Should I change my belief about the dog food? I don't know. It said pure dog food, and now the dog dropped dead. Maybe I should reconsider. Now, when you do that, what are you doing? You had a belief that you accepted. You went through an experience, and then you change it for another belief that you accepted. Now, if all there is different people's beliefs, different people's commitments, different people's priorities, different people's perceptions, it's all subjective, what makes the second better than the first? On Tuesday, you believed the first one, and on Friday, you believed the second one. If the only claim to fame of the Tuesday belief is that you believed it, the claim to fame on Friday is only that you believe it. So what could motivate you to change from one to the other? In what way would you be making progress? In what way would you be improving your circumstances by saying, oh, not that one anymore. No. I've got to give that one up. I'm going to change it for this one. In what way are you better off? Of course, given the example that I gave you, it's clear that dog food wasn't pure. Dog food was contaminated. I don't think the relativist can answer that question. Those are two concrete, simple, practical examples. Then there's a theoretical problem. One thing that became popular in the 20th century, I learned it from work in my PhD thesis, but it's been practiced over and over again. When you have a rule is supposed to apply broadly. One thing you might try is applying the rule to itself and see what you get. So, for example, all rules have exceptions. All rules have exceptions. Listen, people don't think things through, and there are new experiences coming up, and they're incomplete, and not everything's well defined. All rules have exceptions. Okay. Now I ask, those 4 words, all rules have exceptions. Is that a rule? Sounds like it. Sounds like a rule. Well, let's see. If all rules have exceptions, does that rule also have exceptions? All rules. And this is a rule. Yeah, self-reference is fine here. So if all rules have exceptions, then this one also ought to have an exception. Let's see now, what would an exception to the rule, all rules have exceptions, be? What would an exception to that rule be?
Itself.
It would be, no. Well, it can't, no. An exception, again, the proposition is all rules have exceptions. So when I see a rule, platypuses are flat, and greens are good for your health, and Australia is south of New Zealand, and whatever rule you like, when I see a rule, I'm just supposed to expect it doesn't always work. Sometimes it fails. Right? Okay, so now the proposition I'm thinking about is all rules have exceptions. For that to fail, I got to find a rule which doesn't have an exception. So the prediction fails. So for all rules to have exceptions, it must be that there's some rule that doesn't have an exception. And that means that the rule contradicts itself, which is not a good position for a rule to be in. So when you try applying a rule to itself and see what happens, it's a good idea to check the consequences, because if when you apply it to itself, it ends up as a contradicting itself, then there's something wrong with the thing that you started with. Now let's try this with truth. There is no absolute truth. That's one of the things the relativist says. There's no absolute truth. None at all. Nothing is an absolute truth. Well, how about that very proposition? There is no absolute truth, 5 words. That's a proposition. What's its status? Is it true, really true, solidly, absolutely true, or no? Here's not quite as bad as the first example, but it's bad. I'll show you why. Let's try both sides. Let's make it consistent and universal and hang to it all the way to the end. There are no absolute truths. Even this one, this proposition about absolute truth, it isn't absolute either. Okay, if that's so, what have you got to say to me? I believe there are absolute truths. Are you in any better position than I am? Your poster boy proposition that you put up on the placards is there are no absolute truths, but that's just your poster board. My poster board says there are. And you say there's no better claim for one than the other. So why are you opposing me? Why do you call me an imperialist? Why do you call me prejudiced and dogmatic? You chose a poster and I chose a poster. None of them have any absolute truth. They're all just what you happen to decide to commit yourself to. So you lose your position in the dialectic. You can no longer accuse me of making some kind of mistake if you don't have absolute truth as a basis for it. The other way out, in logic, though it has deficiencies, as you'll see, the other way out is to say, no, we made a mistake. We should have said, there are no absolute truths except this statement itself. This one is, but nothing else is. That's at least consistent. That's not going to undermine itself. But then we'll have to ask, why is that? So if the one you just made is absolutely true, there is such a thing as absolute truth. There's such a concept. There's such a reality. Only you say, it only applies to mine. It doesn't apply to anybody else's. Why should we trust you? How do you describe the difference? How do you define the difference? How do you defend the difference? No longer has the ring of, oh, sure, I got that. See, people make mistakes. Nobody's perfect, and so forth and so on. It's just arbitrary to say what I believe is really good, and you guys are all in the soup. You guys are all losers. So the idea of taking relativism and applying it to itself leaves you with two outcomes, neither of which is good for the relativist. One is a case where he no longer can accuse you of any fault, and he wants to accuse you of a fault. And the other is where he can accuse you, but he has no basis for doing so. Of course, he's got to say he's better than everybody else, his is really true, and the other ones aren't. I think this attack on truth is really incompetent. I can tell you that in philosophical circles, this is not controversial. Yeah, in every circumstance, there's 16 different theories, and maybe 2 out of 16 will go down this path. But the vast, vast majority of philosophical wisdom is that this is a mistake. Aristotle said, if you're having a discussion with someone and you trap him in a contradiction, and he says, yeah, I contradict myself, okay, so let's keep going. At that time, you say to him, go drink beer. Like, leave me alone. This is not a discussion looking to get to the truth and aimed at using and finding reasons. If he's just content with the contradiction, then, he's doing something else, and leave him alone. Go talk to somebody else. Okay, so I think calling truth into question is not going to be an acceptable move in this discussion. So now let's go to the idea of morality without God. Now here, because I've heard this discussion so many times, and in the middle of the discussion there's a kind of logical fallacy that takes place, so let me introduce you to a concept, the concept of burden of proof, and then we'll be ready to get started. I don't know if it occurred to you, in criminal proceedings in America, a jury trial, let's say, when the jury gives its verdict, there are two possibilities: either guilty or not guilty. Did you ever think, why isn't the alternative innocent? Guilty or innocent? Why is it guilty or not guilty? It's not just a quirk. There's something very profound here. When you have a trial, and you have a prosecutor and a defense attorney, what is the responsibility of the prosecutor? What does he have to do to win?
Find the defendant guilty.
Well, it's not a question of finding. It's not private.
To determine without a semblance of a doubt that the person is guilty.
Prove beyond a reasonable doubt. That's not finding it for yourself. That's making it found for everybody else. You're proving it beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the responsibility of the prosecutor. That's called the burden of proof. What's the responsibility of the defense? Careful now. Think this through. What is the responsibility of the defense?
Proof of innocence.
No.
Protect their rights.
Say again?
Protect their rights.
Yeah, but what does he have to establish in court?
Doubt.
Huh?
Reasonable doubt.
I can't hear you. Doubt. That's all. The prosecutor has to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. All the defense has to do is produce a reasonable doubt. He doesn't have to show he's innocent. All he has to show is that the prosecutor has failed to prove him guilty, and then he goes free. It's not symmetrical. The prosecutor has to establish a fact. The defense doesn't have to establish a fact. If the defense is successful, you can walk out of court and say, we don't know whether he's innocent or guilty, but he wasn't proved guilty, so he goes free. I looked this up. In Scotland, they have a different series of verdicts. They have three. They have guilty, not proven, and innocent. So they explicitly distinguish. That's a little bit more articulate. But the American version it tracks what the dynamics are in the contest. The prosecutor has the burden of proof to show that it's true, beyond a reasonable doubt, and the defense doesn't have that responsibility. All he has to do is say, you haven't proven your case. So, again, if the prosecutor wins, we have very good reason to believe what happened. If the defense wins, we may have no reason to believe what happened at all. Let's put it in probabilities. The prosecutor has to show that there's an 85% probability that he's guilty. Suppose the defense shows that it's 50-50. Do we know what happened? Not at all. It's 50-50. But he wins because the prosecutor didn't make 85. Now, when you're having a discussion with somebody, discussing an issue, and typically when you start out, you take one position, he takes another position, so then it would be good to decide how you're going to conduct the discussion. You could just slug it out. But when you slug it out, you're in danger. Here's what I recommend. Take turns. One, accept upon himself the burden of proof, and like the prosecutor, and let the other one take the job of simply defending against the proof, defending against the argument, showing the argument doesn't succeed, and then switch sides. So here's how it'll go. This one says, the proposition is true, here are my reasons, here are my arguments, here's my proof, and now you have the opponent saying, that's not a good proof, those arguments aren't good arguments, witnesses you chose aren't reliable, and so forth and so on. If the first person succeeds in producing a solid argument that is correct, we'll then say, we'll agree with him, we'll know what's true. If the other one succeeds in knocking down the reasons and the argument, at the end we'll say, so we don't know. What's new now is that the first guy doesn't know either. He thought he knew, he thought he had good reasons, and now nobody knows. At this stage in the discussion, nobody knows the correct answer. I say this because very often when you set up an argument and one party is trying to prove his position, at a certain point, when going gets rough, and he sees things are going against him, then he says, well, you prove your side. But that wasn't the game. The game was he's supposed to prove and he's supposed to evaluate his proof. And what happens is this. He's supposed to give a proof. He's working on it. It's getting weaker and weaker. Then he says to the other guy, will you prove it? The other guy tries and fails, and then this guy says, so I win and I'm right. No, but you don't win. You don't win. If you fail to produce a proof, and he fails to produce his proof, where are we now? Just ignorance. Nobody knows anything. You don't win because the other guy can't prove you wrong. You have to prove yourself right. So, in this case, the question is whether there can be an objective morality without God. We said yesterday, lots of people think that there can't be. And a lot of people tell you that, and I'm not going to agree with them. Let's conduct the discussion the way I suggested. Let's start with the popular opinion that you've heard. Without God, there's no morality. And I want to hear a good reason to think that's true. One second. Without God, right. I want to hear a good reason to think that's true. And here's the dynamic. You give me a reason, and if your reason is good, and I can't oppose it, then I'll agree with you. If you give me a reason, and I can show you there's not a good reason, at that point, you should weaken your allegiance to your belief. That doesn't mean you're wrong. Even if I take away all your reasons, you might still be right. But you should weaken your allegiance to it. What's going to be unfair is for someone to say, well, you think there can be an absolute morality? Show me the absolute morality. Show me the criterion of good and bad. Show me what makes it good and bad. That's a false move, because if he can't argue against it and I can't argue for it, he doesn't win. We both can't argue, and the issue ends up in the middle as a stalemate. And we both have to admit we both don't know the answer to the question. You don't win because your opponent loses. You only win because you win, because you prove it for yourself. So let's start with this. Those people who think that without God there can't be objective morality, why would you think that? Why would you accept that as an idea which you would think is true?
Rabbi, can we define objective morality, please?
No, but I spoke the other day about definitions. You weren't here when I spoke about it. I think that we understand enough. I'll just say some words without a definition, and that's enough understanding to conduct this discussion on. Objective morality means that certain moral principles are right and others are wrong. If someone has different ones, he's making a mistake. He's not equal in the picture of the world. He's out of touch with reality. There's an objective right and wrong about these matters, and that's what people who deny an objective morality deny. It's precisely that. So now, why would you think this? Yeah.
So, isn't typically the ideal of God is that God creates like a standard of how things should be, which holds accountability for people to perform a certain way. So without God, there's no standard in a sense.
Okay, let's try that. That's the kind of thing that some people will say. Now, you say God creates, that's because you're taking, from your own point of view, a different position,
The Jewish point, yeah.
right? We're now asking whether there's a good argument against the atheist.
Yeah.
So you have to do it in his terms, not in your terms. But you say God could be a standard. We'll discuss that later. God could be a standard. Take that away, then there's no standard. So I have to ask you, how do you know there is no standard? This one will be gone, but maybe there's another standard. Maybe there could be another standard. How do you know there isn't another standard? Here you have to resist the temptation. Well, show it to me. You think there is? Show it to me. That's not the game. The game is you need to present an argument that there can't be. That hunting for it is irrelevant, is worthless. It can't be. What is going to be the argument that there can't be a standard? So there are variations of what you said, which we hear. The vocabulary is slightly different. I think they all come down to the same thing. One thing they'll say is this: there's so much disagreement throughout history and even in contemporary terms. Now, we talked about this in other terms a few days ago, but let's take it on for now. There's so much disagreement. What's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's evil, what's just, what's unjust. Clearly, when there's all of that disagreement, there isn't any objective right and wrong to the subject. That kind of vast disagreement just means there's no right and wrong to the subject. Well, let's think of parallels where there were widely varying ideas about things. And, for example, is the earth round or flat? For a long time, different people, different societies had different pictures about that. For hundreds of years, there was no way to settle it. Does that mean there was no reality behind it? Isn't it just that they didn't understand the world well enough to settle it? The fact that there's disagreement doesn't mean that there's no fact of the matter. It just means that we haven't found a way to settle the fact. Suppose someone pushes a little deeper. He says, not only is there disagreement, but we don't have a method for investigation. We have no procedure which we would agree upon. Well, if we do that, then we'll come out with an answer. Maybe it's too hard. Maybe we haven't got the resources. Maybe it takes too much time. But at least here's the kind of thing that you would do to find out. And we don't have a procedure for doing that. If you don't have a procedure for clarifying the issue, doesn't that mean there's no real truth there? I don't think so. Let's take the example I gave the other day about why do the stars shine? Why does the sun shine? What makes it shine? 300 years ago, 3,000 years ago, what method did they have that they could say, put it to a prism and look at it day and night and take readings from the North Pole? That'll do it. That'll give us the answer. Did they have a procedure that they could follow that would lead to the answer? Certainly not. They had no clue what this procedure would be. Does that mean there's no answer to why the sun shines? Today we think it's nuclear fusion, don't we? So, the fact that you have disagreement, the fact that you have no agreed upon method for settling the issue, doesn't imply there's no truth. It just means that we're at a very primitive stage of investigation, or could mean that. And same thing's true with morality. The fact that there's no agreed upon procedure doesn't mean that tomorrow, as I said yesterday, ethics will have its Newton, and Newton will organize the subject, and he'll bring about a method for doing so. Indeed, I'll make one more remark and I'll take your question. Indeed, the philosophers who think about ethics thought they had them. There were theories of ethics which thought that they could define what counts as true, what's good and evil, and right and wrong, and just, and they could argue that it was so, and that it would be objective, and at least in principle there would be a way of finding out which one was. If utilitarianism was such a view, Kant's view was such a view. People didn't say, "Oh, you're not bringing God in? Forget it. Well, that's just off the page." Those attempts didn't succeed, but that doesn't mean another attempt wouldn't succeed. Lots of things have required multiple attempts, and then sometimes they actually succeed. So I don't see any argument here making the idea of absolute morality for an atheist impossible, contradictory, unthinkable, absurd. It might happen, it might not happen, but that's where we are. Now, you had a question.
During this discussion, there's something I've been recently struggling with, and there's a question I have that I don't need to throw us back to the basics, but I hope this question might help with this discussion of arguing for or against objective morality, or perhaps it could be merely a reflection of my own ignorance.
Okay.
What is the definition of morality?
I don't think that's going to help. I don't think we need it. Let's boil it down to right and wrong. Just right and wrong. Nothing is really right and wrong. Different people have different thoughts and different people have different ideas, but there's no way to classify that one is better or one is worse. One is more in touch with reality and one is not in touch with reality. Right and wrong is just a description of how you feel about things. That's the idea of rejecting absolute right and wrong.
Does absolute mean that there cannot be a scale? For example, if...
No, that's the interesting point. There can be a scale, but then the fact will be this is more right than that.
Exactly.
And that'll be a fact. And it won't be free for someone to say, no, I think the other one's more right.
But they're both
So
right,
you're right. It shouldn't be just right and wrong. There could be grades of grades, absolutely. Absolutely. When you have a scale of options, A, B, C, D, and E, and A is the worst, and B is the best, and you have the options that maybe C costs a lot. So you don't want to go as high as C, like D. So it could be more right and less right. I think that's correct. But then C really is more right than B. And that's where the reality lies. It's a good point. Yeah.
So I feel like someone arguing from the relativist point of view, you're saying they can never disprove that there's an objective truth. They would reply, well, you can never prove that there is an objective truth. So we're both in a state of ignorance, which is really relativism.
That's fine. No, that's not relativism. No, it isn't. No, it isn't.
We're both ignorant, so I can just do whatever I want.
No, that doesn't follow either. Let's follow this out. Relativism is a full-blooded position. It's that there isn't any basis for morality. You reduced it down to, I don't know that there's no basis, and you don't know that there is a basis. That's not the same as there is no basis.
But it's saying I can never find
One
out.
second. No, it doesn't say that either. It says where we're up to now, given the reasons that we have now, given the arguments that we have now, nothing determines whether, given the reasons that we have now, given the arguments that we have now, nothing determines whether, given the arguments that we have now, given the arguments that we have now, nothing determines whether, given the arguments that we have now, given the arguments that we have now, nothing determines whether, given the arguments that we have now, nothing determines whether, given the arguments that we have now, nothing determines whether, given the arguments that we have now, nothing determines whether, given the arguments that we have now, nothing determines whether, given the arguments that we have now, nothing determines whether, given the arguments that we have now, nothing determines whether, given the arguments that we have now, nothing determines whether, given the arguments that we have now, nothing determines whether, given the arguments that we have now, nothing determines whether, given the arguments that we have now, nothing determines whether, given the arguments that we have now, nothing determines whether, given the arguments that we have now, nothing determines w there is a basis or there isn't a basis. But that doesn't foreclose the future. Maybe in the future we will have reasons. It's only a reflection of what attitude I should take now, right?
And the relativists would say, and maybe in the future we won't have that.
Correct, maybe that's right.
So
But that's not the same as advancing relativism, because relativism doesn't allow the idea that it's possible that there is a basis. Now I'll show you the nafkamina. You're considering pulling the switch on a which will ignite a bomb that will kill 150 people. I don't know. People say it's wrong, but we don't know whether there's a basis for morality or there isn't. I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows. Well, then maybe there is. For all you know, there is. And maybe you should play it safe. Because if there is, you're going to be in serious trouble. That's different from a relativist who says there isn't any basis, period. Hopeless. Give it up. He can pull it and without any conscience. But if you don't know, then you have to take the other possibility seriously as a possibility. You might want to play it safe. There's a big difference between being in the middle and not knowing either way versus saying for sure that there's no basis. It's not the same thing.
And if we never find out, that doesn't change anything.
Right.
It changes a little bit because the amount of responsibility you have depends in part on how much you know. And if you're acting on the basis of a doubt, you have a certain level of responsibility. If you're acting on the basis of a certainty, you have a higher level of responsibility. So once you find out, your level of responsibility will change. So it will make a difference. The outcome won't be different. That's right. The outcome won't be any different. But the level of your responsibility will change. Yeah.
So, if we follow this thought that we don't know, maybe we should play it safe. Have we gotten further than, let's say, Pascal's wager? Like that kind of, is that where the limit of where we are right now?
No, and I think because this does come up from the people who have been exposed to it, I'll say a few words about Pascal's wager. Pascal's wager doesn't belong in this corner. My first edition, my first draft of this book that I published, I had a whole long footnote on Pascal's wager, but people said it was too technical, and so I left it out. Pascal's wager works like this. Imagine that you have two options, and one option, if true, promises you a vast, vast positive gain. And the other option, if true, doesn't promise you such a vast gain. Well, those who've studied decision theory know that the expected utility, if the expectation is so vast, then the right thing to do is to choose it, even if the probability is very low. Pascal said, let's take the extreme case. Let's suppose there's no evidence at all. None at all. So evidence is out of the picture. We're not talking about evidence or probability at all. But I have one option that promises me an infinite good. I have another option that promises me only a finite good. Well, infinity against the finite, he was a mathematician. Infinity against a finite number, every finite number is zero against infinity. So if you have an option that promises you an infinite good, you should choose it even if there's no evidence at all. He's short-circuiting evidence. He's doing an end run on evidence. Evidence doesn't matter anymore. That's Pascal's wager. Of course, for him, the option that offers you the infinite return is Christianity. Right? And the option he's arguing against is a secular life. And a secular life can only promise you pleasure and opportunities and so forth and so on. And Christianity is offering you infinite felicity forever. So then, even if there's no evidence for Christianity at all, you should choose it. That was Pascal's wager. Now, Pascal's wager has been responded to in a number of ways. One is, if the Christian could use it, then the Muslim could use it, and the Buddhist could use it, and the Hindu could use it, and the Jew could use it, and they could all use it. And that leaves you without a reason for choosing one promise over another promise when they're equally infinite promises. That's a well-known standard objection to Pascal's wager. I have another objection. You see, when you talk about what it promises, when you talk about the value of something, that is subjective matter. The whole decision theory is how to make rational decisions given your probabilities and your values. What happens if a person says, you have a religious system, and according to your religious system, this act is subject to capital punishment, and you're going to kill him. But I, as an atheist, hold that unjustified killing is infinitely wrong. I don't think you could justify that for any amount of money or any amount of pleasure or any amount of health or whatever. Why can't an atheist also have infinite subjective values? And then you can be then it's infinity against infinity, even for the atheist alternative. So I don't think that in the end, Pascal's wager works. I'm not doing that at all. My game is to provide evidence and claim the evidence is sufficient to make a rational decision because it's supported by the evidence. So I'm not doing what Pascal's doing at all. We're in different ballparks. Okay, yes?
What's the evidence of the question you asked us about the objective moral?
Well, so far, all we're up to is the one who claims without God there's no morality hasn't got a good reason. So at that point, I would expect him to say, gee, I thought I do this, but I don't really, and I have to join you in being in doubt about it because I can't support it.
And we're proving with God there is morality.
Well, that's the next step. That's the next step. We haven't started that yet.
I have the evidence.
Well, let me set up the argument in a way, and we'll see whether the evidence works. Okay, so now the other side is, if you says that God does establish morality. You said it in the back there also. This position has a few different ways of being put, but let's take a simple one. It's called the divine command theory. When God says, don't steal, that makes stealing wrong. When God says, give charity, that makes giving charity right. As I think it's Dostoevsky who said, if there is no God, everything is permitted. Right? Well, he wasn't a philosopher because permitted is a world term. So he didn't mean what he said. But what he meant is, if there's no God, there are no standards. God creates the standards. If there is no God giving the standards, there aren't any standards. Okay, now let's imagine, as in fact is the truth, that God gives standards. He says, don't steal. Why is it that when he says so, that makes it wrong? When I say so, it doesn't make it wrong. Even when Donald Trump says so, it doesn't make it wrong. What is it about God that makes his saying it different from everybody else, so that when we say it, it doesn't have any effect at all, but when he says it, it has that effect that it becomes wrong because he said it. Let's try some of the features of God and see whether they back this up. Let's take God being all-powerful. He has all power at his disposal. Because he's all-powerful, when he says don't steal becomes morally wrong. Is that a good reason for thinking that it becomes morally wrong? Because he's very powerful? No. I mean, we don't say the more powerful a person is, the more moral he is, do we? We say, well, he's been very, very powerful, so he's got to be very, very moral. We don't see any connection between power and morality at all. So it can't be that he's all-powerful. What about all-knowing? Since he knows everything, when he says it, it becomes wrong. There's no obvious connection between what you know and your authority to determine a fact by making a pronouncement. And indeed, we know lots of people who know a lot of things and who certainly aren't the sources of morality. So it's not because he's all-powerful, and it's not because he's all-knowing. So
truthful.
Rabbi, can't we argue if he's all-knowing because he tells, when he commands us, the ones who learn the Torah, is supposed to teach the Torah. So if you know it, you're supposed to listen to it and follow. You're supposed to hearken, listen and do.
because he told us to.
He knows, that's what
Okay,
he knows.
but we're going back. Yeah, but see, when you say you know something, there's a world out there, and the world has facts in it, and you have all those facts in your library. We're now talking about creating a new fact. We're talking about his saying, don't steal, and now there's a new fact in the world called stealing is wrong. It wasn't there before. So knowledge isn't going to help. Knowledge is only what was there before. Now it's creating a new fact. Now, there's an answer to this question, but the answer is unfortunate for the position we're considering. The answer is that he's morally perfect. He himself embodies morality. So that when he says, don't steal, it's morality talking, telling you, don't steal. That's a good reason to say, when he says so, it becomes morally wrong, because he himself is morality. But you see, that means that for me to decide to listen to him, for me to hear in what he says a moral obligation, I have to decide beforehand that he's moral. And in order for me to decide beforehand that he's moral, morality already has to be there to apply to him. It can't be that he's creating it when he starts to command, because I have no reason to listen to his commands unless I've already decided that he's moral. So this proves the proposition that we're testing. The proposition we're testing is that when he commands it, it becomes wrong. I'd like Dostoevsky, if he never said anything, nothing would be wrong. Nothing would be right. Well, then when he starts to talk, what gives me reason to listen? The good reason to listen, the reason that connects to the speech being moral, the good reason to listen is that he is morality. But then I've got to decide that before he talks. So it can't be that his talking brings morality into existence. For him to bring morality into existence, it already had to exist. So we'd have a good reason to listen to him. So neither side of this argument has an obvious support for it. Not that there can't be morality without God, nor that God's commandments create morality. Neither side of this way of connecting morality and religion is I think, philosophically out of the woods. Now, as I said, this is not a popular position. My only justification for taking it is that it's correct. But other than that, if you tell it to other people, they won't necessarily be happy. But then I would invite them. I would tell you, invite them to come here during this year. Come on Sundays when I have Q&A, and let's talk it out and see whether you can do better than this. This seems to be what the situation is with respect to this proposition. There's a third problem we have to go into. What's the Jewish position on the subject? And I'll talk about that. But leave that aside for me. Yes.
I wanted to ask if morality can change with the example of the nakedness of Adam and Eve when they sinned, the original sin.
So that's an interesting question. It's not clear that even after they eat from the tree of knowledge, they acquire the opinion that being naked is morally wrong. It's clear they think it's inappropriate. But it's not all inappropriateness is moral failure. Let's take, instead, I'm a musician, but let's take acting, right? Theatrics. There's a famous line in Shakespeare, to be or not to be, that is the question. And different actors pronounce it in different ways. Now, I'm old enough to remember when they made the first answering systems, what's the telephone number? And all the numbers are recorded, and they just plug in this recording of that, recording of the name, right? The number is 60413, right? Now, so imagine someone says, I read English, I understand English. Here, give me the thing. Here it is. To be or not to be. That is the question. I hope we'll agree that that's theatrically incompetent, right? If an actor pronounced it that way in the Shakespearean play, he'd be out of a job. He read it correctly. Every word was correct. Yeah, but it wasn't theatrics. I mean, it didn't express the pathos and the inner struggle and the colossusness of the decision he's trying to make, and that's what theatrically he's supposed to do. So that's a wrong and bad way of reading it. It's not morally bad. Not morally bad. It's artistically bad. Not all wrong or inappropriate or bad things are moral failures. Right? And we're talking now specifically about moral failures. So I don't remember anywhere, of course I haven't read all the commentaries, but I don't remember anywhere where they felt that to remain naked would be a moral failure. It wouldn't be a matter of being evil. It would be inappropriate because of the new circumstances. Then one has to describe what the new circumstances are and why it's inappropriate. That I think is a better way of it. But now you're asking whether morality can change. Well, let's put it this way. Our understanding of morality can change. Usually, when our understanding of morality changes, we feel that before we were missing something, before we were making a mistake, and that now we understand better. And we then say, before we were doing things inappropriately, we were trying our best, and we went to the best understanding information that existed, so we're not vicious, we're not corrupt, but we were making a mistake. So isn't that morality changed, but our understanding of morality changes. Just like when scientific theories change, nature doesn't change. It's our description of nature that changes. So that definitely happens. We do realize contradictions in the way we looked at things that we didn't see before, and consequences that we didn't take into account before, and elements of the world we weren't as familiar with as before, and then we change our calculations, and we discover better and more clearly and more accurately what morality requires. I think that's the right way to describe it. Okay, so this is the general situation, the general background. I'll leave you with a formulation of the question I'm going to discuss tomorrow. This is in one of the Socratic dialogues. It's called the Euthyphro problem. He starts 3,300 years ago with the proposition that the gods love the good. And he asks the following very simple chicken and egg question. Is it that because those things are good, that's why the gods love them? Or is it because the gods love them that those things are good? Which is the cause of the other? I'm not going to go through the Socratic discussion of that issue, but we could raise that issue in our terms also. We understand that what God commands is the good, the right, the just, the obligatory, and so forth and so on. There's an identity there. What he says is the morally binding truth. Does he say it because it's morally binding? Or is it morally binding because he says it? And it's similar to what we've gone through now. And I think that we're going to have to say that the question is badly put. The question seems to be it's either A or B, and I'm going to say that there's a compromise. It's not purely A, nor is it purely B. But we'll talk about that tomorrow.